David Lin said, I have a rare condition called TGA, or transient global amnesia. Every Monday, when I open my eyes, I revert to being 25-year-old Tiffany Tang, my memories forever stuck in the past. The USB drive contains videos of David Lin taking me on trips, treatments, and our engagement. It all looks so happy, but it leaves no trace in my mind. Tiffany Tang is still here, can't you restrain yourself a little? What are you afraid of? Tomorrow is Monday, she'll wake up and won't remember anything. David Lin's response sent my heart plummeting into an ice cave. Isn't it even more exciting this way? David Lin hugged my best friend, and they were shamelessly affectionate in front of me, without any hesitation. Scenarios like this had played out countless times over the past 2 years. I desperately ran outside, tears blurring my vision, until I passed a tattoo parlor. I grabbed onto it like a last straw, and trembled as I wrote 3 words on my arm. Leave him. Are you awake? The pungent smell of disinfectant invaded my nostrils, and my head felt like it had been hit by a sledgehammer, the pain nearly causing me to faint. Helpless, I looked at David Lin beside me. I know you're confused right now, calm down and watch this USB drive. My memory was frozen on the day of the car accident. On the highway, the car in front of us braked suddenly, and David Lin instinctively swerved the steering wheel, not to save himself, but to protect me in the passenger seat. He crashed straight into the guardrail, barely escaping with his life, while I didn't even have a scratch, except for the injury to my brain. The first thing David Lin did when he woke up was propose to me, even while still wearing a hospital gown. I couldn't bear to watch any longer, and threw myself into his arms. When I looked up, I caught a glimpse of pain in his eyes that was hard to detect. Instantly, a huge sense of unease gripped my heart like vines. Why did I have to get such a strange illness? Is an unchanging lover really what he wants? Will he get tired of me? Why was the hospital room changed? The nurse led in a familiar face, my best friend, Susan Miller, who filmed the proposal video. I thought Susan Miller would be the first to come and see me. But as soon as she entered, she bypassed me and naturally leaned on David Lin's shoulder, her bright red nails particularly striking against David Lin's dark suit jacket. David Lin, there's an urgent matter at the company that needs your attention. I'll take care of honey, Susan Miller said. David Lin subtly removed Susan Miller's hand, looking apologetic. Tiffany Tang, I'll have Susan Miller take you back to your apartment later. When did they become so close? She's always been at odds with David Lin. Every time we argued, she was the one who told me to break up with him, saying David Lin wasn't good enough for me. How did she end up working at his company? I frowned, and David Lin quickly kissed my forehead, instructing Susan Miller to make sure I watched the entire video. Got it, go ahead, Susan Miller said with a smile. These two, one is supposed to be my future husband, and the other is supposed to be my friend of many years, but now I felt like an outsider. Inside the hospital room, only the sound of the video remained. I didn't dare to miss any detail, desperately trying to etch every happy moment into my mind, trying to find my connection with David Lin again. For a moment, I forgot that I was still on an 4 drip, and the blood flowed back, turning the 4 drip red. Susan Miller, help me get the nurse to change the medicine, I called out several times before she finally looked up, clicking her tongue impatiently. So annoying. I couldn't figure out why Susan Miller's attitude had changed so much until she looked at her phone and said she had something to do and left. Alone, I took a taxi to the apartment that David Lin had mentioned. The apartment was unfamiliar, decorated like a model home. It was hard to imagine that I had lived here for 2 years. I took a deep breath and opened the curtains. The moment I raised my hand, the tattoo on my forearm, which was just beginning to scab, caught my eye. It clearly read, "Leave him." The skin around it was still reddish, obviously recently done. When did I develop this hobby? Confused, I called David Lin, but there was no answer. I called the office, and the phone was quickly picked up, but the person on the other end just cursed impatiently before immediately hanging up. Are you ever going to stop? Every Monday you come asking all sorts of questions. I have a job too, can't you just leave me alone? After being inexplicably scolded, and with David Lynn still not answering his phone, I couldn't help but feel lost. The person in the mirror had dull skin, prominent eye bags, and looked completely different from the person I remembered. This shouldn't be like this. I pulled out a long-abandoned makeup kit from under the bed and rummaged through it. David Lynn still hadn't returned, even when it was dark. Tears streamed down my carefully applied makeup, and as I looked at my dejected self, I suddenly felt ridiculous. What was I doing? Couldn't I live without David Lynn? The bottles and jars scattered across the floor, revealing the bottom of the makeup kit, on which was clearly written, "Leave him." My mind exploded. This was the second time I had seen these words today. I compared it to the tattoo on my sleeve, and the handwriting was the same, definitely mine. What did this mean? Who was this him? There was movement in the living room. Instinctively, I rushed out and, sure enough, David Lynn was back, but besides him, there was also an unexpected person. Susan Miller. Unlike during the day, she had changed into a form-fitting evening gown and looked radiant. "Oh, were you crying?" She glanced at me, tossed her expensive handbag onto the sofa, and went straight to the master bedroom. "I'm so tired, I'm going to take a shower." The amount of information was overwhelming, and I didn't know how to react, so I instinctively looked to David Lynn for help. He hadn't changed much from 2 years ago, and even had a bit more mature charm, but looking at his indifferent face, I felt a terrifying sense of unfamiliarity, and couldn't feel any closeness. He sighed and reached out to me. The moment he touched my arm, for some reason, I instinctively flinched away, leaving his hand hanging in the air. "Susan Miller moved in to take care of you. Don't overthink it." I may have amnesia, but I'm not an idiot. Did I really need her to move in just to take care of me? Lying in bed, I couldn't understand it. Susan Miller knocked on the door and, reversing her earlier attitude, placed a glass of water beside me. "Honey, it's time to take your medicine." She looked at me expectantly, as if she wouldn't leave unless I drank it. David Lynn sat on the sofa, looking at Susan Miller, then at me, and finally nodded. "The doctor prescribed it, drink it." That night, I slept very soundly. When I woke up again, the spot beside me was cold. David Lynn had already left. Susan Miller was checking her makeup in the mirror by the door. More striking than her red lipstick were the hickeys that her low-cut neckline couldn't hide. If I remembered correctly, her neck was completely white last night. How could it be like this after just one night? I narrowed my eyes and raised my hand. "Your neck. Oh, I almost forgot." She found a scarf and tied it around her neck. "David Lynn is rushing me, I have to hurry." "Don't get the wrong idea, we're going to meet a client," Susan Miller said with a smile. The midday sun shone on her, but I felt a chill run down my spine. In the afternoon, Susan Miller sent a message saying she and David Lynn would be going back to the apartment for pizza. It wasn't until midnight that the two of them finally arrived, smelling strongly of beer. David Lynn frowned as he looked at the untouched meal on the table. "You didn't eat? Oh, how forgetful of me." Susan Miller blinked her eyes and looked coquettishly at David Lynn. "I forgot to tell Tiffany Tang that we wouldn't be back for pizza." "It's okay, it's her own fault for being so stupid." Soon after, Susan Miller brought me water again, reminding me to take my medicine, and David Lynn still condoned Susan Miller's behavior. "Do I have to take it?" I asked David Lynn. He was sitting in the shadows, and I couldn't see his expression clearly. After a moment, he nodded. "I may be stupid, but I won't be stupid a second time." I knew something was wrong when I slept so soundly last night. I put the medicine in my mouth in front of them, and once Susan Miller left contentedly, I quickly spat the pill out from under my tongue. This time, I clearly noticed Susan Miller's fingertips brushed against the hickeys on her neck as if unintentionally, and she gave David Lynn a provocative look. I closed my eyes, my heart pounding. A moment later, I heard David Lynn get up. His footsteps gradually approached, then gradually faded away as he left the room. Dragging my heavy feet, I followed him, feeling like the whole world was a huge lie. Yesterday, I had a lover who was like something out of a fairy tale, never abandoning me, but now I was struck with a blow to the head, and everything was gone. David Lynn pinned Susan Miller against the sofa, taking what he wanted without restraint, like lovers in a movie who couldn't control themselves during their honeymoon phase. I finally knew where those hickeys on Susan Miller came from. The moment David Lynn caught sight of me out of the corner of his eye, the fiery passion in his eyes vanished instantly, and he reached out to straighten Susan Miller's collar. My mind was in turmoil, and I rushed forward and slapped David Lynn, trembling with anger. Why? What did I do to offend you? Why are you treating me so badly? The tattoo on my arm, the hint on the bottom of the makeup kit, the hickeys on Susan Miller's neck. I understood everything. A long illness reveals the lack of filial piety, not to mention a man with no blood relation. I told you to go to the bedroom, but you insisted on doing it in the living room, Susan Miller said, caressing the man's cheek with a look of concern. Now look, it's all messed up, and it's only Tuesday. I couldn't believe my ears. I felt ridiculous and couldn't believe how many times I had experienced such scenes over the past 2 years. David Lynn took a step toward me, his eyes dark and unreadable. Please, just let me go. My body moved before I could think. I dodged David Lynn as if I had been electrocuted, but I couldn't reach the door before he grabbed me back and held me tightly from behind. Don't go. I was shaking like a leaf. He gently stroked my back, looking gentle. In a daze, the David Lynn from before seemed to have returned. I've been in so much pain all these years. He tightened his grip, as if afraid of losing me completely in the next second. In the past 2 years, I took you to Disney 20 times, and we saw the Northern Lights 5 times. He smiled self-deprecatingly, even though you don't remember any of it. That's not how it looked just now. Can you give me another chance? David Lynn choked up, which was rare, and my heart also twinged sharply. The more affectionate he was, the more disgusting he became. Susan Miller interrupted at the right moment. Let me talk to Honey, she said, using my nickname in her special tone and giving David Lynn a look. He went back to the bedroom, and they tacitly agreed not to disturb us. Susan Miller sighed and sat beside me. She was silent for a long time, then hesitated and took out a medical record with her name on it. After she left, I couldn't calm down. How could Susan Miller have stomach cancer? We talked late into the night, and when I woke up the next day, the apartment was empty. Susan Miller said that she had always liked David Lynn, even longer than I had. But because she was insecure, she didn't dare to tell anyone. In her eyes, David Lynn was like the moon in the sky, unattainable, while I was her best friend, the one who deserved David Lynn the most. Ever since I started pursuing David Lynn, she had made up her mind to hide her youthful feelings in her heart. Until she was diagnosed with terminal stomach cancer. I don't have much time left, honey. During this time, I'll find a quiet place to live out my remaining days alone. After I die, you have to be happy with David Lynn. Looking at the medical record, I felt complicated. I didn't hate Susan Miller. Whether she betrayed me on purpose or not was irrelevant. She was dying. Still, I planned to leave. While no one was home, I quickly packed my things, but I couldn't find my passport. I searched everywhere, but I found a tattered notebook. The cover had 3 large words, "Leave him." Trembling, I opened it. The edges of the pages were yellowed, looking even older than the writing on the bottom of the makeup kit. The first page only had a few short lines, but the content was shocking. Susan Miller doesn't have stomach cancer, it's all a lie. Susan Miller is giving you sleeping pills, don't take them. If you get a chance to get your phone, ask Mom and Dad for help immediately. The following pages were increasingly scribbled, indicating that this notebook had been discovered more than once. Each time, I would leave a few words on it. The USB drive that David Lynn showed me, combined with this notebook, was the whole story of what I had experienced over the past 2 years. David Lynn says it's the 80th week of my amnesia, and this is a hell tailored just for me. Someone, please save me. Every page was my desperate cry for help. but no one could answer. Even without my passport, I had to leave this place. I didn't take anything and left with just the clothes on my back. The front door wouldn't open, even though I had opened it for a delivery yesterday. I was sweating anxiously. In a panic, I climbed out of the living room window. But the window was also locked tightly from the outside, leaving no room to escape. Just as I was about to smash the vase against the window, the door opened. It was Susan Miller. "How unlucky, you're interrupting my date again," Susan Miller said, holding up her phone, which showed the living room's security camera feed. My actions had been exposed to her under the high-definition camera. "It would be so great if you really had stomach cancer," I said with a cold laugh, my voice tight and hoarse. She threw her purse at me from afar, her delicate features twisting as she dropped all pretenses and glared at me. "What do you think you are? You just relied on your family's money to buy whatever you wanted, even the stars in the sky. Isn't that how you got David Lynn?" Susan Miller had harbored resentment toward me for a long time. I didn't understand why she hated me so much, yet she still pretended to be my friend. "You think David Lynn really loves you? If it weren't for your family's investment, who would bother humoring you, and for 2 whole years?" She revealed all her cards in a fit of hysteria. She was just counting on my amnesia, so even if I exposed them, I would forget everything in a few days. But if I could just get out of this apartment, everything would be different. I rushed towards Susan Miller and smashed the vase at her, but it was intercepted by a large hand, and the vase fell to the ground and shattered. David Lynn shielded Susan Miller behind him, his eyes full of disgust. "Haven't you made enough of a scene?" I lost all hope and slid to the ground. For the next few days, my movements were restricted to the bedroom. David Lynn would come to see me every day, but he didn't say anything, as if he was just checking to see if I was still alive. "David Lynn, just kill me," I said, lying flat on the bed, tears running down my pillow. Of course, I didn't really want to die. He wouldn't do anything to me for the sake of money. I just wanted to see if David Lynn had any humanity left. He was indeed stunned, and after a long silence, he only said one sentence. "I won't let Susan Miller hurt you again. Monday is coming up, and we'll start over then. Sleep now." Start over? Did he really think I would believe his lies after all this? The next day, Susan Miller was home alone and opened the door for me to cook for her. "Since you have nothing else to do, if I'm in a good mood, I might let you call your mom and dad." It was fine if she didn't mention them, but the moment she did, I couldn't contain my hatred for Susan Miller. My mom and dad treated her almost like their own daughter. Even after they immigrated, every time they sent a gift, if there was one for me, there would always be one for her too. "If you're not afraid of me poisoning you, then let me cook," I said, giving up all hope. Anyway, she wouldn't really let me contact my family or let me out. She just wanted to torture me. I turned to go back to my room, but Susan Miller grabbed my hair. "Bitch." I struggled to break free, but I lost my balance and fell hard down the stairs, losing consciousness from the impact. I felt a warm liquid spreading beneath me, and my vision blurred. In a daze, I saw David Lynn rushing toward me in a panic, his face looking anxious, just like when I had the car accident 2 years ago. A flood of memories rushed into my mind, replaying all the events of the past 2 years like a slideshow. Tiffany Tang, marry me. Mr. and Mrs., family name. I will definitely take good care of Tiffany Tang. Can't you be considerate of me? I have my own life too. I have to go, I'm working overtime. Susan Miller is your best friend. How could you lay your hands on her? Tiffany Tang, don't make me hate you. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the familiar white ceiling. This time, I remember all the details from the past 2 years. David Lynn was still holding my hand, just like every other time. "Tiffany Tang, you're awake. I know you're confused right now. Calm down and watch this USB drive." This time, I looked at David Lynn's face without shedding a tear. My eyes were filled with uncontrollable hatred. How could he do this? Colluding with Susan Miller to deceive me for 2 whole years. Every time I cried my eyes out every 7 days because of his betrayal. Would he secretly gloat? He carefully plugged in the USB drive for me. I didn't move for a long time, and David Lin's well-defined fingers covered my wrist. His voice was gentle and seductive. Don't be afraid, I'll watch it with you. This was a cage David Lin had tailored just for me. I have a headache, I don't want to watch it. There was no need to watch it. I had personally experienced every detail, every lie inside. He clearly hadn't expected my reaction. His tenderness froze on his face, and he called for the doctor. Of course, I wouldn't be stupid enough to put myself in danger again. I didn't have any family in America, and I would have to wait for my mom and dad to come back before I could do anything to prevent David Lin from doing anything drastic. The doctor asked me questions and, after reviewing my brain CT scan, told David Lin that there were no signs of improvement. I breathed a sigh of relief. David Lin also breathed a sigh of relief, peeled an apple, cut it into small pieces, and fed it to me. The new nurses all said I was lucky to have such a good fiancé. I didn't show it on my face, but I felt disgusted. What would he think if he knew that I had regained all my memories and was no longer under his control? In the end, he still watched me finish the USB drive. David Lin. Will you regret getting engaged to me? I had watched the engagement video countless times, but this time I noticed something. When David Lin put the ring on my finger, the moment he looked up, his eyes clearly passed over me and looked at Susan Miller behind me. Her eyes were glistening, and she bit her lip, only slowly calming down when David Lin gave her a reassuring look. And in the middle of their eye contact was me, looking ignorant and happy. Even if he said he regretted it now, I wouldn't let him off. What are you talking about? He smiled and put his arms around me. Then, after seeing my serious expression, he became serious and said, I've never regretted it. The doctor said that the injury to the back of my head wasn't serious. David Lin told me to go back to the apartment to recuperate, but I refused. There was no need to go back to that so-called apartment. He could only go along with me. David Lin, where's my phone? David Lin put down his work. I forgot to tell you, your phone broke when you fainted. His face was expressionless. I'll take you to buy a new one another day. I said oh and didn't say anything else. He wanted to cut off all my escape routes? But he had never imagined that I would one day regain my memory and no longer be at his mercy. Just as I was planning to borrow a phone from someone after David Lin left, he slowly said, Honey, how about we settle abroad after I finish my project? He gently stroked my hair, just like he had promised before I lost my memory. What do you mean? I know you must miss Mom and Dad, so why don't we sell the company and live near them? I was wrong before, always trying to make you choose between your mom and dad and me. But I've thought about it for the past 2 years. As long as I can be with you, nothing is too much to give up. Then we'll get married, okay? He took out a ring from somewhere and put it on my ring finger, looking straight at me. This time, my reflection filled his eyes, as if they couldn't hold any impurities. What trick was this? David Lin? Susan Miller stood at the door. Are you two getting married? David Lin was busy around my bed, going to find the nurse Andy pouring water for me, never once giving Susan Miller a look. Susan Miller's fingernails dug hard into her palms. This is so sudden. I didn't expect you two to get married so soon. Ha ha ha, is that so? I also feel like it's pretty sudden, I said awkwardly, which Susan Miller took as a provocation. She slapped the glass of water out of my hand, and the glass shattered on the floor. I don't agree. I rolled my eyes. Didn't these two rehearse before acting? She even believed the lies that David Lin told to deceive me and was losing her cool so recklessly. I don't need your approval to marry Tiffany Tang, David Lin said, his eyes colder than ever. We're not only getting married, but we're also planning to settle abroad. Don't bother Tiffany Tang anymore. She doesn't have a friend like you. Settle abroad? She looked at the man in front of her in disbelief. When he didn't explain, she ran out crying. Aren't you going to chase after her? I said with a look of amusement, and just as I was about to peel an orange for myself, David Lin grabbed my foot. Be careful. He squatted down and picked up the glass shards, his brow furrowed. As usual, in a little while, David Lynn would make up an excuse to leave and go comfort Susan Miller, giving me time to contact my family. But until evening, he showed no signs of leaving. Instead, he had someone bring a blanket, looking like he planned to spend the night at the hospital room. David Lynn, aren't you busy with work? I asked tentatively. I can manage myself if I'm busy. You don't have to stay with me all the time. David Lynn didn't answer, his back turned to me. I took a deep breath, wrapped my arms around his waist from behind, and after a lot of effort, I managed to say something nice. Honey? His body stiffened for a moment. I used to tease David Lynn like this. He went from blushing at first to being completely indifferent. What did you call me? He turned around to face me, his expression unclear in the dim light. GHT. Before I could think of an answer, he pulled me into his arms, his voice muffled. I thought you didn't want me anymore. I won't let you regret it. What was this? Before I could recover from his words, David Lynn looked at his phone, grabbed his jacket, and left, saying that there was an urgent matter at the company and he would come see me tomorrow. No need to guess, he must be going to comfort Susan Miller. Easily, I borrowed a phone. I edited an email with all the events of the past 2 years and sent it to my mom and dad. After receiving a reply, I returned to the hospital room contentedly, only to see an uninvited guest. Susan Miller? Didn't David Lynn go to find her? Why was she here alone? Seeing me come in, Susan Miller stood up in a panic. Honey. The moment I heard that nickname, I knew what she was going to do. She looked hesitant and reluctantly took out a lab report, without even trying to set the stage like last time. Actually, I have liver cancer. It was getting more serious each time. I almost laughed out loud. And then? Anyway, I had already contacted my family. Mom and Dad said that my cousin was in America and had already told him to come over right away. Now, there was naturally no need to pretend with Susan Miller. Susan Miller didn't expect that I wouldn't be moved at all, but she still bit the bullet and continued. I'm having surgery next Monday, and the doctor said there's less than a 1% chance of success. She smiled self-deprecatingly. If I hadn't regained my memory, I probably would have believed her lies after seeing such brilliant acting. Actually, I've been hiding something from you. I've liked David Lynn for a long time. Susan Miller's eyes were calm when she said this. Did she really like David Lynn? Or was she just enjoying the pleasure of trampling on me? She talked on and on about how she had fallen in love with David Lynn, and how much pain and struggle she had gone through during the 2 years I had amnesia. They were all old actors. I had no interest in her words. Until Susan Miller said something that instantly brought me back to my senses. Can you give David Lynn to me? Even so, I was still shocked. Susan Miller quickly explained. Don't misunderstand. I just want him to be with me until I go into the operating room. Can you? She looked up at the right moment, letting me see the tears glistening in her eyes, as if they would fall out the next second if I refused her. Of course. I took her hand. I don't know how I'll live without you when you die. If she really died, I would set off 2 strings of firecrackers. Susan Miller hugged me excitedly. I pretended not to see the triumphant expression on her face in the mirror. As soon as Susan Miller left, my cousin arrived. He stood panting in front of my apartment door, looking like he was being chased by a ghost, dressed in a sharp overcoat, his hair perfectly combed. Bro, what's? He rushed forward and hugged me tightly. Mom told me everything. A moment later, he seemed belatedly embarrassed, cleared his throat, and released me, changing the subject. How could you be such a love-struck idiot? He had a point. I had to admit, 2 years ago, I was a bit of a love-struck idiot, otherwise, I wouldn't have believed David Lynn's bullshit. Kevin Jiang. After all I've been through, you still have to say that. I pointed to the bandage on my head, looking aggrieved. His expression instantly darkened, and he pulled a contract from his bag. Sign it. It's long overdue. It was a written notice to reclaim the bonds of David Lynn's company. After signing, the money my parents invested in David Lynn's company under my name would be fully recovered. I checked. His company has a lot of capital flowing out recently. There's no way he can come up with this money. He'll have to sell the company. This stuff never should have belonged to him in the first place. Kevin Jeong picked up the contract, suddenly calm and professional. He was snatched up by a top law firm abroad after graduation and had already been a partner for 2 years. It was hard to believe he was handling such a small case. I looked at the amount on the contract. The company hadn't been established for long, and this money would be devastating to David Lin now. I signed my name decisively, and the thought that I would no longer have anything to do with David Lin made me feel strangely light. It was all over. I put on my coat and left with Kevin Jeong. As soon as we reached the parking lot, a familiar car stopped in front of us. It was David Lin. He rolled down the window, revealing a slightly tired face from staying up late, his brow furrowed. Kevin Jeong? They had met once, at my absurd engagement ceremony, when Kevin Jeong left a bottle of good wine at my place, saying we would open it on my wedding day. Looks like that wasn't going to happen. Before David Lin could ask anything, Kevin Jeong pulled me into his car. He drove straight out, turned on the high beams, flashed them at David Lin in the middle of the road, and rolled down the window. Get out of the way before I run you over, you son of a bitch. It was the first time I had heard Kevin Jeong swear. He must be furious. But I felt nothing. I had already digested all the anger and resentment over the past 2 years. David Lin wasn't going to let me go. He walked to the passenger window and pounded on it. I nodded to Kevin Jeong, and he sighed before rolling the window down a few inches. David Lin, I'm going abroad. Promising to stay in America in the first place was a mistake. I really was a love-struck idiot. Even now, I believed David Lin had truly loved me. I also firmly believed that once a relationship soured, there was no point in trying to save it. I know about you and Susan Miller. Congratulations. You don't have to pretend in front of me anymore. From now on, you can be together openly. It wasn't the first time I had exposed him and Susan Miller. David Lin stood there stunned. In the past, he always hated my unreasonable behavior, but I had never seen him look so pained. Bro, let's go. David Lin stood there, watching me leave. Just as the car turned the corner, I heard a roar from behind, followed by the sound of breaking glass, and an alarm went off. Drive faster, bro, or the security guards will think we're stealing the car. You still have the energy to joke around? He instinctively wanted to knock on my head, but he retracted his hand because of the bandage. Do you have any idea how worried Aunt Sarah and Uncle David were? If I hadn't been in America, they would have had to call the cops and have your fiancé arrested. I felt guilty and didn't dare to speak. After a long mental struggle, I finally called my parents. They answered on the first ring. I thought I would be greeted with a barrage of scolding, but they didn't say anything. They just kept crying, saying that they were glad I had recovered and that they would never let me suffer like this again. The next day, Kevin Jeong found a new hospital and insisted on giving me a thorough examination. Bro, I'm fine. The doctor said it's all external injuries. The stitches will be removed in 2 weeks. He rolled his eyes at me, looking at me like I was an idiot. You still dare to trust a Dr. David Lin found? I was speechless. In the end, I had every test done, and Kevin Jeong was relieved only after hearing the doctor say that I was fine. He then reported my safety to my parents. I held the diagnosis report in my hand, which clearly stated that the patient's brain function had recovered well and had reached the clinical recovery standard. I'm really okay? Those few simple words meant a lot to me. Are you questioning my diagnosis? The attending physician was a college classmate of Kevin Jeong's. Unlike Kevin Jeong, he always spoke with a smile and didn't have the air of an authoritative expert. Overjoyed, I noticed the hospital logo in the upper right corner of the diagnosis report. On closer inspection, the format of the entire diagnosis report was incredibly familiar. This was the same hospital that issued Susan Miller's cancer diagnosis. I opened Susan Miller's Moments and immediately saw the cancer diagnosis report that was only visible to me. I handed it to the doctor and received an affirmative answer. Susan Miller's diagnosis report was indeed in the style of that hospital. Unfortunately, the attending physician in charge had been dispatched abroad and couldn't be contacted for the time being, so there was no way to confirm its authenticity. I had an idea. Susan Miller came from a family with 2 working parents. She had been strictly disciplined since she was a child, especially by her controlling and ignorant mother. Susan Miller had suffered a lot at home and had avoided her mother as much as possible in recent years. What would happen if her family knew that their only daughter had cancer? It would still take time to get a visa. Plus, I had to attend David Lin's company's shareholders meeting on Monday, so my plans to go abroad were temporarily put on hold, and I moved into Kevin Jiang's apartment. Life gradually became peaceful. I no longer had to worry about waking up and having my memory reset, facing endless lies. Nor did I have to be used by Susan Miller, believing her bullshit about having cancer over and over again. A few days later, I received a message from Dr. Shin. The fish had taken the bait. Susan Miller's mother, through my introduction, took her diagnosis report to Dr. Shin. Since it was the same hospital and the data from the various tests on the diagnosis report were very recent, Dr. Shin immediately gave her a chemotherapy plan. Susan Miller's mother was overjoyed, feeling that her daughter still had hope. No matter what Susan Miller said, she insisted on dragging her to chemotherapy and forced her to sign the chemotherapy consent form. When it came time for treatment, she was so scared by the chemotherapy needle that she wet herself and begged the nurse to let her go. Dr. Shin even sent me a picture of the needle that had scared Susan Miller. It was indeed very long. I couldn't help but laugh. Kevin Jiang glanced at my phone and said coldly, "What did that kid say to you? You're smiling so happily." I was busy replying to messages and ignored him. "Mind your own business." Okay, I'm not allowed to mind your business again. Last time I wasn't allowed to mind your business, you insisted on marrying David Lin. This time I'm not allowed to mind your business, and you'll be swindled out of everything by that kid. Don't come crying to me then. It was wrong to plan this behind Kevin Jiang's back, but I dared to do it because Dr. Shin was his friend after all. He's not as scary as you say. Love-struck idiot, Susan Miller finally admitted that she had forged the hospital diagnosis report and didn't actually have cancer. Her father rushed over and beat her up again before taking her back to his hometown, saying he would discipline her properly. Since I had given them a heads up, there was no way the hospital would let her go easily. They immediately detained her and called the police. Kevin Jiang said that Susan Miller could face up to 3 years in prison for this. Bro, it's up to you. Now you know to come to me? When you were plotting with that Shin guy, did you ever think of me? I was just afraid you'd worry. I still need you to put on a show at the shareholders meeting on Monday. Kevin Jiang snorted and didn't pursue the matter. The loan to David Lin's company had already expired, and it was only right to take it back. There wasn't much to say. But Kevin Jiang kept saying it wasn't that simple. Sure enough, when I, as a director of the company, presented the document to redeem the bonds in front of David Lin and all the shareholders, someone immediately became agitated. The company is in such trouble right now. Why should we let you take it away just because you say so? That's right. You're just a crazy person. You have no right to sign this document. David Lin sat at the head of the table and didn't speak, he just looked at me from afar. Little girl, you should bring your guardian and then talk about taking the money back. This remark caused a burst of laughter. David Lin glanced at that person and stood up. The meeting room immediately fell silent. It seemed that David Lin had made some achievements in the company over the years, and even those old geezers had to defer to him. Under everyone's gaze, he walked towards me step by step. You can take all the money. David Lin stared at me and said in a hoarse voice, it was yours to begin with. I'm sorry. I didn't expect him to be so straightforward. He had confined me for 2 years and no longer had any feelings for me. Wasn't it all for this money? Why was he saying he would give it back now? Afraid that there was a trick, I exchanged a look with Kevin Jiang. He took out a stack of documents and gave them to the assistant to distribute to each shareholder in the room. Of course, that included David Lin. It was the diagnosis report that Dr. Shen had given me. Now, do you have any objections? David Lin gripped the paper in his hand tightly and looked at it repeatedly, trembling as he spoke. When did you recover? That's not important. I touched the itchy scar on the back of my head. It was a lesson David Lin had left me, and it was also the turning point of everything. What's important is that you pay on time. With that, I left the meeting room. This time, David Lin didn't stop me or become hysterical. No matter how thick-skinned he was, there was no way he could say anything to make me stay. But I still underestimated him. A few days later, David Lin appeared at the airport. He was wearing a black overcoat and looked completely different from the listless man of a few days ago. It seemed that he had taken the time to clean himself up, but he was still shrouded in a layer of gloom. From a distance, I thought I was being haunted by a ghost. Here to see me off? It wasn't my fault for being presumptuous. The main reason was that David Lin's capital chain had broken, and he was being pursued by the previous project, and the company had declared bankruptcy. Now, he himself was restricted from leaving the country. Susan Miller was also in jail. The only reason he was here was to see me off. Yeah, I came to give you this. David Lin reached out and placed a cold key in my palm. I wasn't lying to you. I really did plan to go abroad and settle down with you, but now, consider this apartment a gift to celebrate your recovery. David Lin stood there quietly, but his eyes were turbulent, with emotions I couldn't name, and my heart skipped a beat. Susan Miller and I, there were no feelings between us from the beginning. Neither of us. I know she did a lot of bad things to you, but every Monday when you woke up, you would reset to the way you were before, so innocent, so cheerful. Gradually, I turned a blind eye. But I didn't expect that every Monday when you woke up, your attitude towards me would slowly change. You started to no longer rely on me, and even wanted to run away. I panicked, a wave of absurdity washed over me, and I said with a cold laugh, "Is that your excuse for hurting me? I'm sorry." It was almost time to board, and I turned and left decisively. The transparent elevator rose slowly, and I looked back at David Lin on the ground. When did he start to become the way he was now? But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered were my family waiting for me in the distance, and the balance in my bank account.